Hello, everyone. How are you? It's another Monday afternoon, another week to serve the Lord and tell the whole world all about how good He is and what He's done for us. And more importantly, or at least equally importantly, what He can do for them. I'm so glad you're here. Today I have a special guest. Pastor Michael Gantt speaks for those who can't speak for themselves. He's a retired pastor who might just be busier now than any of the 45 years that he was behind the pulpit. In addition to speaking the truth at Christian Writers Conferences around the world, he's the founder and director of the Kenya Development Fund. He's going to tell us all about that fund, as well as how he will serve at the Greater Philadelphia Christian Writers Conference coming up July 26th to the 29th. Hi, I'm Patricia Durgin, the Christian Message Coach, and this is Marketers on a Mission, the live show to equip and encourage Christian writers and speakers. And this is episode number 86, my interview with Pastor Michael Gantt from the Kenya Development Fund. Hello, Michael. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
So good to talk with you. You got things rocking and rolling up there in Vermont, don't you?
We are, and we're just as hot here as it is in Atlanta.
Is it really?
We've been in a heat wave for 2 weeks now. We had temperatures up to 106 degrees in Vermont.
Are you teasing me?
No, I'm not teasing you at all. I wouldn't tease about anything like that.
I didn't even know that was possible.
You know, real Vermonters think they're going to get their lives in order because they're not dealing with hell very well.
Oh my goodness. Let me make sure that we are online because I'm getting a little bit of a mixed message. Yes, we're good. We're good. We're rocking. So we're going to talk about your project you've got going on right now, and you've had going on for really a decade almost, or right at a decade.
Yeah, just about 10 years, yeah.
Then we're going to segue into how you're going to be serving at the Christian Writers Conference, the upcoming Greater Philadelphia Christian Writers Conference. But tell me first, please, why is it so important to you that there is no spiritual vision?
Why is it important to me that there's no spiritual vision?
Why is that an important point for Christians to be aware of?
Well, because without vision, anything without vision dies. Anything without vision goes nowhere. There has to be a vision, but it depends on how you interpret vision. I interpret vision as a plan. As you look in the scriptures, God gave men a vision. Joshua had a commandment to go take Jericho. But he didn't have any idea how he was going to do that until he met the captain of the host in the field, and there he gave him a plan. And so he went into the battle with Jericho with a vision. And so I think a vision that is from God is really a plan that takes us from point A to point B. I met a young man in Kenya one time who told me he was going to be an evangelist who traveled all over Africa preaching the gospel. And I immediately asked him a question. I said, "How are you going to do that?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What's your plan? How are you going to accomplish that? What's going to be your support mechanism? How are you going to make contacts?" He had no idea. He just wanted to preach the gospel, but he had no plan. And so I prayed with him and asked God. I instructed him, you need to pray and ask God to give you a plan for how to do that. By the way, he pastors a church now more than 1,500 people.
So it sort of worked out okay for him.
It sort of worked out all right. Once he had a vision, once he had a plan beyond just, I'm going to go do something,
I really like that aspect, that approach that you just described, because most of the time a vision is so ephemeral. It equates to a dream, and it's just pie in the sky. It's wonderful, but we don't really have that practicality to it, do we?
Well, I think what happens is everything begins with a dream. But if we stay in the dream, it becomes fantasy. And once we're into fantasy, fantasy is very satisfying. And there are people who just exist in fantasy and they never get moving toward the fulfillment of the dream, which has to turn into vision. There has to be a plan. All right, how do I go from here to there? And so you find people that have been living 10, 15, 20, 25 years in a fantasy, and they're making no movement toward the fulfillment of it. That's why vision is important. That's why I have to understand I'm going from here to there. I'm a very A to B guy. Everything I'm in, I don't get involved in things that just go on and on and on forever. any project I get in, I want to know where I go in and where do I leave, where do I enter and where do I exit, and there has to be a mark that says, all right, this is what we set out to do, and we've done it. I'm encountering that in Kenya right now with a project I'm working on there. We've come to point B, and I don't know where I go from here. Do we develop another vision for me to be involved in it, to go on from where we are now to where we're going? And that's very important to me. I don't give money to projects that don't have an exit point, because you're just throwing money in a hole. You're just putting money, and then next month we'll need some more money, and the month after that we'll need some more money, and so there's no exit point. And I think vision has an entry point and an exit point.
I always like hearing you talk.
Well, I got a cousin that says I talk too much, but that's her opinion. My wife also agrees with that from time to time.
Well, even though, I didn't say it in jest, even though we're chuckling about it, you were wise, you were thoughtful. Christ has given you abilities that either other people don't have or other people don't use. It's easy for you to stand out in the crowd, I'm sure.
Yeah, I do. I don't want to touch that. I do stand out in the crowd.
I have something similar in my work. I work with marketing, and there has to be measurable results.
Right.
How do you know when it's finished? How do you know? How can you tell anybody else what you're bringing to the table? How will they know when they've accomplished the task? You gotta be specific. If
you're going to Cleveland, you need to know where you are, not where you're going. You need to know where you are first. So a map is useless unless you know where you are. And once you know where you are, then you can decide where you're going, and then charting the course between those 2 points actually becomes pretty easy. And the same way comes in work that we do for the kingdom. We have to know where we are. We have to have an idea of what needs to be done. That's our end point. And so once we've decided where we are, what do we lack? What needs to be done? And then where is it that we're going? What is it we want to accomplish? Then the way going forward actually gets pretty clear and pretty simple. Yes. But until we define those 2 points, we don't know what to do. So anyway, I hope that answers your question.
It does. Now you have 2 other passions ministerially. What are they? One is family and the role of the father.
Well, yeah, that's one of the great things. Of course, I grew up without a dad. I never knew my biological father. I was born out of wedlock in 1948. Long story. I don't want to get into it because it's another whole thing. But I grew up without a dad, and it never was really an issue to me until and the ministry where we are here in Vermont. We're in a very low income, blue collar, even below blue collar type community. Serious drug problems, serious alcoholism problems, and serious problem with fatherless families. We have a generation that has missed out on the whole concept of manliness or manhood. And so we have a bunch of boys who shave and make babies.
Yes.
And but don't understand that the siring of a child brings to it responsibility. Biblically, spiritually speaking, we have a generation of fathers who are actually living in rebellion against God, because God says you are the spiritual head of your household. Yes. And so some years ago, when I was just being aware that we had so many little girls walking up and down our street pushing baby carriages, one child right after another, and there was no man in the picture. And the way our system works in the country right now, these girls actually get rewarded for having babies without a man in the picture. And so we have a whole generation of children growing up without their fathers. Without going into a long Bible study, biblically speaking, I believe the Bible teaches us that the home is the center of the kingdom. Now, we've made this institution called the church the center of the kingdom, but it's really the home. If you look at the whole of scriptures, children are supposed to be learning spiritual truth from their parents, yes, particularly from their fathers. And we have a generation of fathers who've abdicated that role. They've just stepped out of that role, and it's send them to church, take them to church, drop them off at church, ask your mother. But My job is to bring a check home and to make sure there's a roof over your head. And then a lot of guys aren't even doing that. And so children are growing up without any concept of the fatherhood of God, because the example or the model of the fatherhood of God is supposed to be living in their house.
Yes.
And I have many children in my community don't even know the man who came out of mommy's room. They don't even know his name, let alone what a model of the Father, Heavenly Father, he is. So we have a generation right now in America that has no spiritual memory. And by that, I mean, they've never been to a Bible camp. They've never been to a VBS. They've never been to a church. The only time they hear the name of Jesus is when somebody's angry. And so they have no connection point. They go by my church and they say, Mommy, what goes on there? And my mom says, I don't know. And so we have to restore, if the home is the center of the kingdom, then the Father is the spiritual center of the home. And right now, the spiritual center of the home is not there. And if he's there, he's not engaged. And if he's even engaged, he's not being the leader. He's not teaching his children the word of God. Deuteronomy chapter 6 lays all of the weight. Psalm 78 lays all of the weight of responsibility for spiritual nourishment and nurturing of our children at the feet of the fathers. And we've abdicated that. And so that's one of my passions, to see fathers restored to their role as the spiritual head of their home.
With as many fingers and as many ministerial pies as you have, particularly over in Kenya, mm-hmm. How are you able to address that very real, practical need in your community? Or are you doing it in your community?
We do it in a lot of ways. We have a boys and girls club that meets on Wednesday nights. It's almost all neighborhood children. And our women are teaching the children, the girls, how to do, the name of the program is called Keepers at Home. And they're teaching them skills that they're supposed to be learning at home, but they're not learning at home. We have a generation of children who are being parented by parents who weren't parented.
Yes.
We're living in the backwash of the 60s. That whole 60s movement is really coming home to roost right now. And that lack of parenting, that lack of involvement, the breakup of the family, all of those things, is we have a generation of children who aren't really being parented.
You have such a deep passion for this, and you have other passions as well, just here locally, regionally, and nationally. How did Christ connect you to this great need in Kenya?
We have a deaf ministry in our church. We had a very vibrant deaf community in Brattleboro, because there was, for many years, a school for the deaf here, the Austin School for the Deaf. Mm-hmm. And so there were many deaf people who went to school there and stayed in the area. Many of them worked there. And so through a series of connections, we had a group of deaf people who started attending our church. We just so happened to have a couple of teachers in the church who were teachers for the deaf. And so they started signing for our services. They would sign the worship service. They would sign the sermon. We started a Bible study for the deaf. It actually ended up being taught by a PhD, a doctor who was deaf. And she started teaching it, and that was even better than a hearing person teaching it. And so we had a pretty vibrant deaf community. That has waned a little bit because the school closed because of lack of funds, and all of the folks who worked there, and many of them who stayed around because of the connection to the school, have moved away. But in the interim period, we have a large group of people. My wife interprets for the deaf. I have a daughter-in-law who interprets for the deaf. I have a son who is married to a coda. A coda is a hearing child of deaf parents. And she's hearing, but her entire family is deaf. So we're very connected to the deaf community. And traveling in Kenya back in around 2004, 2005, I saw this little school off the side of the road. I was headed to another place, and I saw a little sign flash by the car, and I said to my driver, I want to go back there. I want to see what was going on. And as a result, I found this little school very, very impoverished, living in just horrible conditions. There were about 28 students. And a woman who had come from another country to head up the school, she had married a Kenyan man, and so they were operating the school. And as I got to know the students, because of our connection to the deaf community and our own deaf people here, I felt, Patricia, like they were just living from one emergency to the next. There was no vision. There was no plan. They were just putting out brush fires. Mm-hmm. And so I consulted with them, and I'm really condensing 10 years down into a pretty short period of time. I said, we need a plan. We need to, and what I do is strategize. I said, I'd like to come on. I don't want any affiliation. I don't want a paycheck or anything like that. I just want to help you develop a strategy. And through a couple of circumstances, it really became clear to me that what we needed to do was to help the school to become self-sufficient and self-supporting, that they would not be living from one donation to the next, that it wasn't just going to be a bunch of people throwing money into a hole in the ground, that they'd have to send some more next month. And so I actually helped them start a bakery. I have a friend who's an engineer in Kenya, and he designs these beautiful, very efficient wood stoves. And he built for me a couple of wood-fired baking ovens. And we installed the baking ovens there. We sent a teacher up, a baker, who began to teach the older students how to bake bread. We did the market studies. We knew that a bakery should be able to flourish there. And within a matter of months, they were baking 700 loaves of bread a day, and they were selling every loaf of it.
Oh my goodness!
And it looked to me like it was just going to be, wow, you know, this is going to be so easy. You know, when you say this is going to be so easy. Well, when money started to float to the surface, we discovered that the fellow who was over the school was a criminal. He was just using the school because it brought in donations from the West. The children were basically being neglected, and he was just enriching himself. And my engineer actually said to me, you should come over here, but don't tell anybody you're coming. Uh-huh. And so one weekend I said to my wife, I'm going to Kenya. Don't tell anybody I'm going. And so I got on a plane. I flew to Kenya, and I showed up there one Monday morning. And I hate to confess this, but it's as close as I've ever come to beating a man in my life. It was terrible. And the education had stopped. There was no teaching going on. The children were out on the streets hawking this bread. And in the meantime, the headmaster and his family had moved into a brand new gated community with hot and cold running water and satellite television and a security guard at the gate. And long story short, we shut the school down. And 6 months later, we opened up 25 miles up the road. And that's where the Emmanuel Christian School for the Deaf came into existence. And our new headmaster, which was the young man who alerted us that things weren't right, is a young fellow by the name of Wesley Agingo. And he's our head, doing a wonderful job. And the school has grown now. We have 106 students. And there's a very high incidence of deafness in this part of Kenya for a lot of reasons. Malaria, measles, meningitis, there's a whole number of issues. But we had rented a small nursery school that had been abandoned. And when I visited it, this would have been in 2008, I was there, and I kept looking across the way at this field that was covered with weeds and water. And God spoke to my spirit and said, that's going to be the new home of the school. And I thought, how providential that God would find us a rental property right next to our eventual home.
Yes, yes.
And so long story short, we bought the piece of property, and then we started systematically building a new home for the children of the school. And just in June, I was there and I dedicated the last building of the campus. We now have a primary school. We have 2 65-bed dormitories. We have a 3,000 square foot all-purpose building with ceramic tile. It's a meeting hall, it's a chapel, it's a dining hall, it's a kitchen, it's all of those things. And then just last month, I dedicated our last building, which is a 10 classroom, 4 office academic center. Beautiful thing that it's just amazing what God has done. I'm so excited about it because this is point B, and that was what I said to him. And it's interesting that you started off with the question you did, because that's exactly what we did at Emmanuel. Is we evaluated where we were and what needed to do, and then we took a big piece of, like the tablecloth that you roll out on a church supper table,
Yes.
the big rolls. We rolled one of those out on the table, and I threw a bunch of markers on top of it. And Wesley and I spent the whole day before with a ruler, a tape measure, measuring the property and figuring out how long it was and how wide it was. And then we took those markers and we just drew our dream out on that piece of paper. And then we went on with no money. We had no money, and one day I was back in the States, and Wesley called me, and he said, "Pastor, we have a terrible problem." He said, "The rented building where the boys have been sleeping, the owner came today and said, I've sold this property, and you have to get out now." And he's throwing our things out on the ground. And so I said to him, "Remember that piece of property that we bought? Now go find a contractor and find out what it would cost to build a dormitory for those boys to sleep in.
Yes.
And don't build what we need, build bigger than what we need." So in 3 weeks, he came back and he said, I have a plan and I have a cost. He said, "We can build a 65-bed dormitory, cement pad, brick walls, plaster, metal roof, the whole works, for $11,000. And I said, $11,000, really? I don't think I can get a contractor to visit my house for $11,000. We had begun to build an internet presence. And so I just went online and I said, "I need $11,000. And within 6 weeks, I was able to send him $11,000. And we built that dorm. And then that was 2012. 2015, we built the second dorm and the all-purpose building. We had actually built a primary school out of leftover parts from the first dormitory. And then when we finished that, we started the biggest project of all. Both of those dormitories were $11,000 each. And the all-purpose building, which is a little bit bigger and a little bit more complicated, has a ceramic tile on the floor because it's an eating place, so we wanted to make it a little easier to clean. That was $18,000. And so the plans for a new classroom building came back, and they said it was going to cost us $80,000. And we finished it in late May, early June. Every brick is paid for. It actually turned out to be closer to $90,000, but every brick is paid for. The campus is complete right now. We're actually building one more building, and that is a home for the headmaster. Wesley, and his wife and 2 children, plus a foster child, have lived in less than 300 square feet for the last 10 years. And so I was sort of sitting one day congratulating myself and saying, "Oh, what a great thing we've done." And it was like God said, "Well, you got one more thing to do. You've got to build that boy a house." And so I put it out on our website, and within 4 weeks, I was able to send him the money, and he's going to. I just was looking at pictures of it today, and he's building a nice, and he's building a house. And he said, "I'm building the house big enough, Pastor, so that when you come, you don't have to stay in a hotel. You can stay at my house."
How nice!
So, and it's under roof now. We're really excited about it. So the campus is done. So my situation now is, do I continue with this to the next stage? Am I done? So I'm looking for a new point A and a new point B, and I'm not really sure where that is yet.
Mm. What a fabulous story that he intertwined all of the needs and all of the answers as
Right.
only he can.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even though the campus is complete, save the one important building, and everything's paid for, there are still ongoing costs.
Well, we still have to pay staff, which is always a struggle. The next step for them to take, whether I'm involved in it or not, is the development of a vocational training program. Not all of the students. Oh, one extra little thing that's happened. We now have a teachers college meeting on the campus. We built the campus bigger than we needed. Mm-hmm. So there was a teachers college that needed a space to meet. And so they're actually renting space from the school for this teachers college. And part of their curriculum, part of their program is training deaf teachers. So we have students who are graduating from our school, going on to high school, and then going into the teachers college and learning. We have 3 students who are working on staff there now. And that was just extra. That just showed up one day. And so the next step is technical. We want to restart the bakery. We want to put in a small engine repair shop. We want to put in a tailoring shop. Mm-hmm. All of these to achieve several, and we have a poultry and egg production plant. They have 2,500 chickens they're managing, mm-hmm. and producing eggs and meat for the children, plus marketability in the local market. We have a working farm where we're growing all of our own food. We grow our own corn, our own kale for their traditional greens, beans, tomatoes, bananas. We're growing all of that ourselves, and we're growing enough that we can market some of it. We want to be able to make our own uniforms, because all the children in Kenya have to wear school uniforms. So rather than buying them, we're going to make our own uniforms. But we also want to open a shop so that we can market the uniforms to other schools. Yes. So what we're doing is we're addressing needs in the community in a way that are teaching our older students a trade, but we're also creating income for the school so that the school can be self-sufficient and self-supporting. On this last trip in June, I had a solar engineer with me who did all of the specifications for installing a solar generating facility that is going to be picked up by a multinational corporation. They're going to come in and put in a solar generating plant for the school so that we don't have to buy electricity. We generate our own electricity. And so that's coming up this year. And they approached me. I didn't have a thing to do with it. They said, "You need a solar generating plant in this thing." And we went, "Yes, we do." And actually, we want to put you one in. And so a guy went with me to Kenya. He did all of the specifications, all of the measurements, all of that. And so this year we expect to be able to generate our own electricity.
That is stunning. And it sounds so easy when you see the end result. Well, you started with the field.
Yeah, we started with a field and a vision. And I put, I don't know how many tens of thousands of miles on my little Volkswagen, going from place to place, talking to people. But God has met every need. As I say, the school is done. The campus is done. Every brick is paid for. We don't owe a dime. Actually, in the process, we had people offer to loan us money, and I refused. I said, I don't want to start us down that road of owing the world for God's work. If God wants it, He'll pay for it. If He's not paying for it, then we're doing something wrong.
Yes. For those who are interested, I'm going to put the links to your website and the Kenya Development Fund website, so forth. I'm going to put all of those above the video after this episode airs. But for those who are interested in supporting, are you still accepting support?
Oh. Yeah, sure. No, don't send us any more money. We don't need it. No, absolutely. We do. And there's actually on our website, there's a link where you can actually give by credit card or by PayPal, or our address is on there, and you can send a check. And the Kenya Development Fund is actually a mission arm of our church. So we're under the tax exempt status of the church. So all gifts are tax exemptable. Somebody realized that I was out beating the bushes and raising all this money, and it wasn't under an umbrella. So they said, "You're going to get in a lot of trouble." So they formed the Kenya Development Fund as a part of our church ministry, put me as a director of it, so that I can funnel all funds through under the 501c3 umbrella, so that if anybody gives, it is completely tax deductible.
Okay, perfect. Let me check and see if we have any comments or questions, and then we'll get right to how you're going to be serving at the Greater Philadelphia Christian Writers Conference.
Okay.
Let me check. I just pushed the wrong button.
I push the wrong button all the time.
Oh boy. I do not see any comments or questions. They will come later. And feel free, always, viewers, to ask a question, make a comment of Michael or of me. It's not exclusive to the live show. Please feel free to comment or ask a question during the replays. If that's when you have time to watch it, you are welcome and most welcome to join us. All right, so now you're going to be at the end of July. I think it's July the 26th. I'm having trouble here. July the 26th to 29th is the Greater Philadelphia Christian Writers Conference, and you're going to be both keynoting and leading a workshop. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Tell us about that.
Well, I'm keynoting on Friday morning at the 8:30 session, and my title is "The Arm of Flesh Will Fail You," and I don't know why I keep getting invited back to these things because I know everybody wants a very exciting and uplifting and encouraging and everything's all right and everything's wonderful, but it's not. I was thinking the other day, in the movie Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman about 100 years ago, there was a great line in the movie that where the warden of the prison where Luke was in prison famously said, "What we have here is a failure to communicate." And
Martin.
Martin. At some point, I realized that as the Christian community, we understand that America has a lot of problems, but we don't really understand what our problem is. We think our problem is a political problem, and it's a spiritual problem. And we're trying to right the ship through a political solution. And there is no political solution for the ills which are harming us right now. And my whole theme that I'm approaching is there is no political solution. There is only a spiritual solution. And the Word of God tells us that whenever we try to go with the power of the flesh, the arm of flesh will fail you. I think Isaiah said, "Woe unto them that go down to Egypt for help." Egypt always being typical of the world. Woe unto them that go down to Egypt for help, for both he who helps and he who is helped will fall. And we are linking arms with a political party in hopes that some election, some combination of elected officials is going to address the ills of our nation. And I just do not believe that is true. And so that's the theme of my message, on my keynote message. I've realized a long time ago that I wasn't at these writers' conferences to tell writers how to write. Probably most of them there can write a whole lot better than I can. But I would rather speak to why we write.
Yes.
Why do we write? What is the motive? Which leads also to the workshop that Marlene has asked me to chair, which is keeping the cross is the main thing. There was a famous statement a long time ago that said the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And I sort of co-opted that into a keynote that I spoke at Philadelphia a long time ago. I don't know how long ago it was. And Marlene Bagnall has just latched onto that. I mean, she really feels that that's an important message. And so for the last several conferences, one at Colorado and now at Philadelphia, I've been asked to chair a workshop that basically the cross is the main thing. The cross is the main message of the gospel. It is the main message of the church. And even as writers, Christian writers, and I have to keep emphasizing that we are Christian writers. We have to keep the cross at the center. We have to keep Christ at the center. Paul said, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God unto salvation." We have an amazing opportunity as writers, an amazing responsibility. And I think sometimes the potential of the glamour and recognition of being a published writer can overwhelm us, and we can forget that as a believer in Christ, regardless of my vocation, the glory of God is my primary motivation. You know, the shorter Westminster Catechism asks the first question, what is the chief end of man? The answer is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. You know, we don't exist for any reason beyond glorifying God. And it's awfully easy for an artist, you know, a singer, a performer, a speaker, a writer who is particularly gifted, to lose sight of the fact that he is gifted, and that a gift always comes from somewhere, from someone, and it's given for a purpose.
Yes.
And it's the purpose that of the gifts that I'm given as a Christian speaker or writer or singer is to glorify God, not to amass fame for myself. John said, I must decrease so that he can increase. And it's an amazingly simple concept. The more famous I become, the less seen Christ is.
Yes.
And the more I'm able to fade into the background, the more I'm able to get behind him and point to him, the more famous he becomes. But the less known I am. And that's a real paradox for those of us. You know, we kind of like the spotlight. You know, our flesh really likes to be seen and to noted and to be, you know, people to tell me what a great job I'm doing and all of those things. But it's a terribly dangerous line to walk.
And all of that is true. And yet, what a paradox, as you mentioned. But the greatest fulfillment is found in the back of the room, where the light is shining on him in the front of the room.
That's right. That's where we've done what we've been called to do. Yes. Jesus said, "Let your light shine, so that men seeing your good works will glorify your Father in heaven." And I tell people this. I'm working on a new book right now, and I was recounting an episode in my life where I was introduced as a great servant of God. And as I was walking to the stage, I was wrestling with this thing, because I realized that there was a time in my life when I so hungered for those kinds of accolades. I worked for them. I desired them. I wanted them. And now all of a sudden I found that I was embarrassed by it. And so I said to the folks, I'm not a great servant of God, because servants can't be great. And if you're great, you're not a servant. I would rather be known as a servant of a great God.
Oh, yes.
Okay. And so we have to consciously, you know, you talked about the greatest fulfillments from the back of the room, but we have to consciously go to the back of the room. You know, Jesus said, don't sit down at the head of the table where somebody's going to ask you to move. Go to the end of the table and let the headmaster invite you to the head of the table. Don't just assume that position. And it's a terribly difficult place to walk, particularly for people. And I'm going to be addressing in just a couple of weeks people whose the greatest desire in their life is to see their name in print, written by. And I've got a book that's got my name right on the front of it. But the point is that ultimately our goal has got to be that men would glorify God. That every word that I write, every song that I sing, every sermon that I preach, that God would receive glory from it. And it is the most difficult task for a human being. It is extraordinarily difficult for someone who is gifted and who finds himself in the public eye.
And yet there's a way. He shows us
There is a way. There is a way. We can do it. And and that's part of our calling, you know, that whatever we do.
I have so enjoyed talking to you and hearing what you have to say about all these many topics. You are very wise and gifted. And your God is very wise and gifted.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
We'll put the links up, viewers. I will be putting the links up to above the video, as I mentioned earlier, so you can get in touch with Michael, both on his Facebook page and profile and the Kenya Development Fund information as well. This has been a Marketers on a Mission, episode number 86, my interview with Pastor Michael Gantt of the Kenya Development Fund. Tomorrow, I'm going to have another guest, a very special guest, best-selling author Tim Shoemaker. You won't want to miss it. Isn't that right, Michael?
Is he going to do some of his famous show and tell for you?
There's no telling what he's going to do.
I always just wait with bated breath to see what he's going to do next.
It's so creative, so creative.
Yeah.
All of that happens tomorrow at 3 p.m.
Great.
right here, Eastern Standard Time. Until then, thank you very much for being with me, Michael Gantt.
Mm-hmm. It's been a great privilege.
I'm Patricia Durgin, the Christian Message Coach, and I pray that more people hear the good news online because of your message. See you tomorrow.